that everybody? We don't have any more we can bring in? All right. Thank you very much. We have Holly May signing again. Larissa Martin is here with us. Chaplain Davis.
Psalm 37, verse 23 and 24. The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. Let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we know that you are with us in both the calm and the storm. Even when the disciples began to fear, Jesus showed he was Lord over the waters. We ask that you would calm the wind and the waters of the approaching hurricane and spare those in the path from harm. Open our hearts in love and generosity to all who need help in the coming days. In all things and at all times, help us to remember that even when life seems dark and stormy, you are in the boat with us, guiding us to safety. In your most holy name we pray. Amen.
Okay, John Quagliarella, National Weather Service.
Thank you, Governor. John Quagliarella, National Weather Service. Hurricane Ian's landfall is imminent along the northern Charleston County coast. As of the Hurricane Center's 11 a.m. advisory, Ian was a Category 1 hurricane with 85-mile-an-hour winds, and we should be getting an update on its position here within the next hour or so. The impacts of Hurricane Ian are already ongoing across the state. Peak wind gusts as of noon have reached 83 miles an hour at Fort Sumter, 73 miles an hour at Folly Beach, 68 miles an hour at Murrells Inlet, 58 miles an hour at the Charleston Airport, 55 miles an hour at Georgetown, and 53 miles an hour at North Myrtle Beach. The strongest winds will occur into this evening across the northern Charleston Tri-County area, up through the Grand Strand and PD, with areas along the coast near where Ian makes landfall potentially seeing wind gusts up to 80 to 90 miles an hour, and 50 to 70 miles an hour farther inland along the track. Tropical storm force winds will extend west through the Midlands. These winds have already downed numerous trees and power lines across parts of the state, and these reports should become more widespread as Ian shifts inland and the destructive winds develop. Storm surge flooding is already ongoing as well across much of the South Carolina coast, with reports of inundation in many coastal communities, especially along the central and northern portions of the coast. Peak surge values of 4 to 7 feet of inundation are expected north of Isle of Palms, with lower values south of there, generally up to 2 to 4 feet. Storm surge flooding will be most problematic through mid-afternoon, but could certainly linger through the evening. Areas in and around McClellanville, Georgetown, Debadew Colony, Pawleys Island, Garden City, Litchfield, and Cherry Grove will be most affected. The storm surge will occur along the ocean front, the back bays, and tidal creeks. Coastal roadways could temporarily become impassable. Heavy rain is also ongoing, with many flash flood warnings right now in the Charleston Tri-County area. The flooding threat will continue into this evening, especially with the torrential rainfall, the high rainfall rates that we're seeing right now with Ian. Everyone's reminded that if you encounter a flooded roadway to turn around, don't drown. And finally, there's an increasing threat of isolated tornadoes, mainly in the far northeast part of the state where a tornado watch has now been issued. Conditions should improve across the state late tonight as Ian weakens and lifts to the north. So again, please seek higher ground if you're in a flood-prone location along the coast, and do not drive through flooded roadways. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll answer questions as we go through the team. As I speak, the center of Hurricane Ian is approaching the coast of South Carolina, just above Charleston, mainly from Bulls Bay up through Myrtle Beach. I've spoken to a number of the mayors in those areas, and they are well prepared. The Grand Strand, particularly right now, is seeing very rough seas. Also, behind the Grand Strand, the water is backing up because it can't get out, but behind the beaches and behind the creeks. But this is not as bad as it could have been. A lot of prayers have been answered, but I would ask people, don't quit yet, because it's still coming. We are not out of the woods. I remind people, as John Quagliarella just said, there's water on the roads. We've seen photographs of it that people have been sending us, the mayors and others, and it's still very dangerous. And there's still winds even where there's not much water in other parts of the state. So if you don't need to go outside in the wind right now, stay inside. If you don't need to drive anywhere, don't drive. Be careful and be smart. So far, fortunately, no deaths have been reported to us as a result of the storm. But there are still life-threatening conditions, and we need to continue to be very careful. I note that in Charleston, they have, according to Mayor Tecklenburg a little while ago, they have about 6 to 12 inches of water in the hospital district. That's much less than was expected. The low wall around the battery was not overrun with water. That is very good news. High tide in Myrtle Beach was at about 12:30, and so we know the water is high there. The winds are high, and as I said before, a lot of water is being trapped inland and can't get out because of the winds and because of the currents. But right now, when the storm seems to be receding in certain parts of the state and is moving on to others at hurricane speeds, this is when people normally get careless, get hurt, and unfortunately often lose their lives. So don't forget that human error is the deadliest thing that we have. Misjudgments, miscalculations, carelessness. So be careful and be smart. I spoke to President Biden this morning. He was fully aware of our situation. He promised whatever help we needed. And you would like to know, of course, he's been here before, and he says South Carolina is a beautiful place. And, of course, I agreed 100% with that. So that is our situation so far, and we have a number of people to speak and provide details. And we'll start with General Jeff Jones.
Thank you, Governor. Major General Jeff Jones, the Deputy Adjutant General. Right now, the South Carolina Military Department, which comprises our Army Guardsmen, our Air Guardsmen, and our State Guardsmen, and our civilian employees, they are poised to continue to respond to our state and local partners and the people of South Carolina. Currently, we have 90 Guardsmen on state active duty. They are positioned forward, primarily performing high water vehicle support, and we are poised and prepared to shift operations in response to any request to any mission statewide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Kim Stinson.
Thank you, sir. Kim Stenson, Director of South Carolina Emergency Management Division. The State Emergency Operations Center is currently at Operating Condition 1, also known as OPCON 1. This is our highest level of alert and response, and we are now fully staffed with a number of state agencies and voluntary organizations 24 hours a day until this event curtails. Right now, priorities include support to counties and responding to transportation, sheltering, supply, and equipment missions. We're also planning for damage assessment and follow-on recovery operations. We continue to work closely with the local authorities to share information and identify unmet needs. We've only received a few requests for support, but they include high water vehicles, swift water rescue teams, and shelter support. In the near term, we expect to receive additional requests for debris management assistance, generators, and also damage assessment. Damages have been light so far, with basically reports of downed trees and localized flooding, mostly along the coast, but we expect that to build over the afternoon. The governor mentioned talking to President Biden, and last night we received a federal emergency declaration which will allow us to seek reimbursement for response costs and any direct federal assistance we might request. And that emergency declaration is different, is not the same as a major disaster declaration, which we requested after the completion of any damage assessment that we would do and potentially provide funding for both infrastructure and repairs and assistance to individuals and families. So the emergency declaration is fairly limited, but it does give us some advantages, certainly at this point. As the storm moves through South Carolina, residents should keep in mind a couple of key points. One is to stay tuned to local television and radio stations for emergency information. Certainly stay inside a well-constructed building, and then try to limit your non-emergency calls to keep that grid open, and use text messages if you've got non-emergency calls. So, reminder: citizens can use scemd.org and the South Carolina Emergency Management app on your phone to keep up to date on disaster information. And we encourage you, citizens that receive damage, to go ahead and report damage through that app, that South Carolina Emergency Manager mobile app. And then the damage assessment report is on the tools section of the main menu, so it's pretty easy to get to. I checked it out last night. Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Director Nanette Edwards.
Thank you, Governor. Nanette Edwards, Executive Director for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. So around 10:30 this morning, statewide, we had outages of around 32,927. As around 12:25 today, we're already over 69,000. I do anticipate that those outage numbers will climb. The crews are standing at the ready, and they will go out and do restoration efforts, but only when it's safe to do so. So when those winds get to about 30 miles per hour, the crews that are out there, you will see them pause. So for customers who currently have power, because I expect the number to climb, please do take a moment and charge your phones, do those things that you need to do while you still have some power. For those that are experiencing an outage, do notify your utility so that they are aware. And if you are out and about for some reason, stay away from downed power lines. If you do have a customer complaint, contact ORS toll-free at 1-800-922-1531. That concludes my report.
Thank you, ma'am. Secretary Hall, Department of Transportation.
Thank you. I'm Christy Hall, the South Carolina Secretary of Transportation. We currently have more than 2,100 employees working this event. As of now, we've responded to more than 200 downed trees across the state that's been removed in order to re-clear the roadway and enable the utility providers to get back in and do the work that they need to as well. We will continue to do that as the storm passes through the state. We are also aware of water on some of the roadways across the state. There are currently no major closures that we are aware of. However, we are closely watching with the local officials some of the causeways in the areas that John Q. mentioned, really north of Charleston all the way up to Myrtle Beach area. As mentioned earlier, we urge people to avoid travel, if at all possible, today as the storm works its way through the state. And, Governor, that completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Director Ben Duncan.
Thank you, Governor. Ben Duncan, Chief Resilience Officer, South Carolina Office of Resilience. We are staying ready at this time to assist citizens who may have damage or may have some need for assistance from the hurricane. We help with short-term problems. We help with long-term problems. And we are here until we take care of those problems for you. We're here to assist the governor. We're here to help citizens. And we provide information that you may need in the short term or long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Emily Farr.
Thank you, sir. Emily Farr, Director of the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation. Throughout this event, the agency, through its division State Fire, has been prepared should any search and rescue efforts be needed. Earlier this week, we mobilized Task Force 1 with collapse and water rescue capability at the State Fire campus here in Columbia, so that we were prepared to back up the regional search and rescue teams that are located in Charleston, Hilton Head, and Myrtle Beach. Last night, North Charleston did request 2 boat teams, so we did deploy Task Force 1, and they arrived there at about 10 p.m. last night. We backfilled those teams by requesting 2 boat teams through firefighter mobilization, and Anderson County and Oconee County answered that call, and their boat teams are now here in Columbia, ready to deploy if needed. As well, the State Fire Marshal, Chief Jonathan Jones, continues to make contact with the fire chiefs along the coast to make sure that they do not have any unmet needs. We appreciate all of the first responders who volunteer and stand ready to ensure South Carolina is prepared if any search and rescue is necessary. And just remind those viewers, if you ever do find yourself in an emergency situation needing those sort of assistance, to dial 911. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Director Mike Leach, Department of Social Services.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. Michael Leach, South Carolina Department of Social Services. Currently, we have 5 shelters open across the state. All are general population shelters. 2 are in Charleston County, 1 in Jasper County, 1 in Orangeburg, and 1 in Williamsburg. As of noon today, we have a total population of 119 individuals in our shelters. Our current total capacity is 759, and so we are about 15% of that capacity. All locations are resourced. DSS staff, Red Cross volunteers, law enforcement, and other volunteer organizations are currently engaged in that mission. There are 0 medical needs shelters open at this time, and we recommend anyone who needs a shelter to bring blankets, sleeping bags, pillows, medications, any personal hygiene or personal items, or special foods if you're on restricted diet. And shelter information could be found at scemd.org or redcross.org, or contact your local county emergency manager.
Thank you. Director Rob Wood, Department of Public Safety.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. I'm Rob Woods, Director of the South Carolina Department of Public Safety. Beginning yesterday, we deployed law enforcement officers from the state throughout South Carolina in anticipation of higher calls for service on U.S. highways, interstates, and other highways throughout the state. We have, in fact, seen an uptick in calls for service starting last night. We were over 90 calls for service from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. this morning, and we're currently over 131 calls for service from 6 a.m. until noon today. And those calls for service were primarily for assisting motorists and for trees and other objects in the roadway. As it stands now, we have over 300 law enforcement officers from the Department of Public Safety, from SLED, Triple P, and DNR who are patrolling the highways. We'll have those folks out there with the expectation that those calls for service will continue to increase as the storm moves ashore. Again, and just to echo the advice given by Secretary Hall, given what we see with these increased calls for service, with these increased traffic incidents, please stay off the roadways until the storm passes. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ed Summer, DHEC.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ed Simmer, Director of the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. We have been working very closely with our healthcare facilities, dam owners, drinking and wastewater facilities to ensure that they are ready. We are very confident that they are ready and prepared to weather this storm successfully, but we do have teams ready to deploy on a moment's notice if we do have any problems. Most important right now as the storm is passing through is to be safe. As the governor said, we've had no one die. We want to keep that going. We don't want anyone seriously injured in that storm. To do that, we need folks to make good decisions. Please stay indoors. If the winds are blowing hard, be away from windows. Stay out of the floodwaters. The floodwaters not only have a risk of drowning, they can have bacteria, they can have toxic substances. If somehow you do end up in the floodwater, as soon as you possibly can, rinse off, get fresh clothes on. That will help protect you. Please be careful with carbon monoxide. People may be using generators as the power goes out. Make sure that generator is outside, vented outside, so you don't have carbon monoxide, which is colorless, odorless. You will never know it's there, but it will kill you. So please be careful with that. Also, never add fuel to a hot generator because that can cause an explosion. Remember that all shellfish beds are currently closed to harvesting in the state because, again, of the toxic potential of the water, so please do not be harvesting shellfish right now. And finally, sometimes when we have flooding like this, we can have coffins float to the surface. I know that doesn't sound very pleasant, but if you find that, please call us, and we will help manage that. We will make sure that gets taken care of. And the number for that is 803-622-7259. I'd also note that many of our emergency medical services, as the storm is coming in along the coast, are no longer able to operate safely. So if you do call for help, you may not be able to be responded to right away. We have checked. All of our hospitals are open. All of the hospital emergency departments are open. If you do need emergency medical assistance, that's where you should go, because many of our regular medical clinics and urgent cares are currently closed, especially along the coast. If you do have questions as the storm passes about things like mold, your private well, food in your refrigerator if your power has gone off, and when is that safe, please go to our website, scdhec.gov. We have information about each of those topics and also hotline numbers you can call for things like mold, dam safety, and those sorts of issues. Finally, let me just say, South Carolina is great because we take care of each other. If you have a neighbor, a friend who maybe isn't as able to take care of themselves, please check on them when it's safe to do so. Make sure they're okay. Provide them the assistance that they need. And, working together, we will be safe and we'll get through this successfully. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Dr. Sewell. Chief Mark Keel, SLED.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Keel, Chief of SLED. All of our personnel has been on standby since the day before yesterday. We began assisting ESF 16 Highway Patrol with patrols of our major highways, interstate, major roadways. We started that at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon, and we'll continue that until after the storm. At that point, if there are areas of the state that we need to transition into some security missions that request the chiefs and sheriffs, we'll do that. I've personally been in contact with the chiefs and sheriffs along our coastal this morning, as well as our regional captains are maintaining contact with them. We will continue to talk to them, communicate with them, and if they have any needs after the storm has passed, we will assist them with any of those security missions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions? Questions?
Governor, are you recommending a certain time when people can actually leave their shelters, leave their safe spaces?
Well, we prefer the wind to be gone and the water to be gone, of course. But we'll be providing that information. It'll be available online, and we'll be having another press conference to provide that. But this is something where people need to use their own judgment. If it's dangerous outside, they should not go. And these winds are high. They can blow projectiles through the air. You can get struck by a projectile, and again, water on the roads can be very dangerous, particularly when there's water in the ditches. And so we want people to use common sense. Stay tuned to the channels. We don't know exactly how the water is going to flow or how deep it's going to be in various places. And there may be some flooding that we haven't seen yet as the water makes its way down to towards the coast. Yes.
How would you describe working with the Biden administration while you're preparing and responding to the storm?
They've been helpful and cooperative, and as we all know, when there's a hurricane, there's no politics involved there. And everybody agrees that we want to keep everyone safe and protect people, help people recover as well.
For the South Carolina Department of Transportation, are there any specific areas where we're seeing the most flooding or trees down that people need to avoid, like certain locations in Columbia that people need to avoid?
Just sporadic trees down in the Midlands and the upstate as these strong gusts move through the state, as described by John Q. with the Weather Service. Of course, in the coastal areas, really from Charleston all the way up to Myrtle Beach, as the tide, currently at high tide, so as that tide is here and the storm's coming in at the same time, there will be elevated water levels across some of the roads. We're seeing that today as we speak, and of course, it'll take a little bit of time for that water to recede, but as soon as it recedes, we're prepared to go in immediately. We've pre-positioned assets to go in and clear any sand or debris or anything that may be blocking those roads immediately to restore service.
Question.
Director Woods said there's about 221 calls for service to your agency. Are they concentrated in any certain areas right now?
No, what we're experiencing, obviously in the coastal area, that's where we're seeing the highest increase. We see some sporadically statewide, but mostly it's in the coastal areas where the storm's impacting us.
Weather question. With the conditions the way they are now, do you see anything that may suggest that there could be severe weather such as tornadic, any activity and things of that nature?
Yeah, there appears to be an increasing threat right now. That could be some isolated tornadoes. That threat is really just limited to the far northeast part of the state, so right along parts of the Grand Strand. I believe a tornado watch was just issued for the northeast part of the state for that threat. And they'll continue through the afternoon, maybe into the early evening hours. But it looks really localized just in that one part of the state. The rest of the state, the threat for tornadoes looks very, very low.
More questions? Yes, sir.
Director Edwards, you mentioned power outages. Are those largely in the Charleston, Tri-County area, or are you seeing those across the state?
When we track all outages, our system, the Palmetto system, does record statewide. So as you can imagine, the ones that are in the up part of the state, they're lower. You are correct. As I was coming in for this meeting, Dominion, I think, was already over 23,000 because they had to pause restoration efforts. The winds had gotten high enough in Charleston. I'm hoping maybe around 2 o'clock, as the winds die down, they'll be able to get their crews back out. I anticipate that the outages will be along the track that you expect, Charleston, Georgetown, that on Myrtle Beach.
I have a question for John Q. You said, when it will hit the coast and then come through the Midlands, will it hit around 5 or 6 o'clock? Do people who are at work right now maybe need to head home early?
So the track of the storm has shifted a little bit. So it's going to make landfall along the coast, and then it's going to track through the northeast part of the state. So the Midlands won't be experiencing the brunt of the storm, but we're already seeing the high wind gusts out there now, up over 40 miles an hour in many areas. So I think that threat will certainly just continue to increase here over the next couple of hours, and I think be with us through the afternoon and the commute home for many people. So I think people just need to use caution. With those kind of winds, even in the Midlands, while they're not as strong, we're still going to expect to see some trees coming down. So people just need to use caution with that. But I think overall conditions will begin to rapidly improve once we get into tonight and the winds start to diminish. Certainly the rush hour this evening, everyone needs to be cautious, whether you're on the coast or even, in the central part of the state. We even had some gusts near tropical storm force in Greenville earlier this morning. So even parts of the upstate are seeing those winds as well. So everyone really should just use caution.
John, while you're up there, can you talk about the timing of landfall in relation to high tide versus low tide?
So high tide generally occurred right around 12 o'clock along many areas along the coast, give or take an hour. So, I haven't gotten word yet that it's officially made landfall, but we expect it to be really any time now. It should be making landfall based on what we're seeing on radar and satellite. So, that's starting to come in here now, and the National Hurricane Center will make the assessment on when that happens, make the official word. What was the rest of the question?
I guess, this is the worst, I hate to use the worst case scenario.
Yeah, so the tides were coming off of high tide, so the water's already built up essentially. The tides come in, and it's not able to flow back out as the storm approaches. So it's just going to continue to build up. So we really expect the worst of the conditions here in the next 1 to 2 hours, we think, as we're coming off of high tide and the waters continue to come in with the approach of Ian. So that surge isn't right with the eye wall, it's usually just out ahead of it. So that's coming in right now with the time of high tide. So the next several hours will probably be the key time to focus on that storm surge threat.
For a little more detail on that, John Tecklenburg, Mayor of Charleston, the high tide there was around noon. But, of course, the storm hit a little north of there, so that was good news for Charleston. As I mentioned earlier, the water did not go over the battery, the low wall at the battery, which is good news, but it was 6 inches to a foot at that time when I spoke to him about an hour ago, I guess, in the hospital district, which usually flood. Whenever there's flooding, it seems it's always there. But in the Grand Strand, Mayor Brenda Bethune in Myrtle Beach, Marion Hatley in North Myrtle Beach, and also Bob Heller in Surfside, we're expecting high tide there. Of course, the farther north you go, the later the high tides are. And it was around 12:30 was when they usually, and where they would begin today. And that's why what John Q mentioned is that water is coming in and the wind's coming in. Whatever rain and water is coming down and trying to get out can't get out, and that's what causes those flooding conditions and flooded roads. Yes, sir.
Governor, you speak a lot about infrastructure. Is there anything infrastructure-wise that can be done in South Carolina to help the coastal areas in events like this, or is this just something you have to bear?
Well, one of the things we do, and of course that's one reason we have so much interest in I-26, because that typically is a road that has a lot of traffic when a storm hits. But we are working, as you know, we've ahead of schedule I'll ask Ms. Hall to address that question on our roads, and that's really the main thing we can do is get those roads, and also to have the people understand the danger that they face in providing them timely and good information as we attempt to do by having this full team here for your questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's exactly what the governor said. I mean, clearly focused on the evacuation route of I-26, primarily making sure that that gets widened using the resources available to the department, and those projects are progressing quite well. The one north of Columbia is well ahead of schedule, and the contract to begin the first part of widening on the section between Charleston and Columbia is about to be signed to move forward with that project, again ahead of schedule. All that work's been accelerated due to leadership efforts with the governor and our legislative body as well. So you've got your major routes, and then of course there's a large emphasis looking at drainage projects throughout the state, especially in areas where we have frequent flooding. So more to come on that, but of course there's plenty of work to do when it comes to drainage work across the state.
More questions?
Director Leach, are you expecting more shelters to open up post-storm?
At this point in time, the local emergency management departments they're prepared. We have not said that they have not said that they're going to open any, but if we have to surge and get one up and ready, we can do that pretty quick. But there are, at this point in time, we don't have any word for any more at this moment.
More questions? All right. Thank you very much.